Greetings friends, and today we continue our wrap-up series inside my home studio while our main UATV one is being refurbished after the recent strike on it. And today we will discuss some disturbing and very quickly unfolding events on the diplomatic front, the call between Trump and Putin, between Trump and Zelensky, upcoming Munich security conference, and is there a future for Ukraine in NATO? Let's go. And the first one, Russia has announced that it is forming a delegation to engage in discussions with the United States regarding the ongoing war in Ukraine. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov confirmed that President Putin and Trump have agreed to instruct their teams to prepare for a face-to-face meeting as soon as possible. And this development raises critical questions. Will Ukraine be directly involved in these discussions? And what does this mean for the future of negotiations? Let us remind you that for the first time in almost 3 years of this full-scale war, there is a direct contact between the Russian president and the leader of the United States, the President Trump, in a future possible face-to-face negotiations. Peskov also mentioned that Moscow will take into account its experience with the Minsk agreements, an indirect admission that Russia aims to secure terms that favor its strategic interests. Let us remind you that the Minsk agreements or the Minsk Accords signed in 2014 and 2015 were originally intended to bring peace to Ukraine and over the Donbass war at that time, but instead they were used by Russia as a mechanism to maintain influence over Ukraine while they were preparing for the full-scale invasion in 2022. And they became a symbol of why you can't negotiate anything with Russia from a position of not strength, but the position of Russian strength. That is not acceptable. What's notable is that the sides have not yet determined which other nations, if any at all, might participate in the proposed talks. As of now, European countries have been left out of the loop, raising concerns about the balance of power and representation in these negotiations. And yes, the crazy thing is that we are talking about negotiations without Ukraine, possibly about Ukraine, and without European Union countries in those negotiations, at least during this moment. Meanwhile, reports from the Wall Street Journal indicate that China is eager to be a mediator country between the Putin and Trump negotiations and has offered to host the Trump-Putin summit without Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's participation. The proposal was reportedly made through intermediaries, but the White House has dismissed it as not viable at all. China's increasing role as a potential mediator is significant. The publication stated, Beijing has positioned itself as a diplomatic player in the conflict, while at the same time deepening its ties with Moscow. It remains a key supplier of dual-use goods to Russia, which bolsters the Kremlin's war effort, and we don't know if Russia would be even able to wage this war for so long without the support of such a strong player as China, even in this trade with dual goods. And the West is, particularly NATO, remains skeptical on China's intentions, with NATO labeling Beijing a decisive enabler of Russia's war, just the thing that I have said previously. And the big question is, can any peace negotiations be legitimate if Ukraine is not at the table? And if Trump and Putin do meet without Ukrainian involvement, what implications could this have for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity? Wouldn't it be Munich 2.0? Let us remind ourselves that the Munich Agreement was signed in 1938 by the Allied countries of that time with Hitler's Germany to prevent a big war in Europe by giving up Czechoslovakia to Hitler, basically signing off that country and without Czechoslovakia's even participation in that summit. And big spoiler, it did not stop Hitler from invading Poland and starting World War II. Then came the occupation of France, and the rest you know all too well. Trump's recent phone calls with both Zelensky and Putin have sparked major controversy. The U.S. president announced that negotiations to end the war would begin immediately and that a ceasefire was not far too distant. However, the terms of such a peace deal remain unclear to everyone. What caused even greater backslash was a statement from U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who suggested that it would be unrealistic for Ukraine to expect to return to its 2014 borders, effectively conceding Ukrainian territory to Russia. Hegseth also stated that NATO membership for Ukraine was no longer on the table. Pay attention that nobody is talking about 1991 borders, the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine, which Russia has recognized itself back then. And now we are talking that even 2014, with Crimea occupied and parts of Donbass occupied, is unrealistic for some effort. The response from US and European officials was swift and harsh. Senator Richard Blumenthal called this approach a surrender and betrayal of Ukraine, emphasizing that Ukrainians have, I quote, demonstrated unwavering determination in defending their homeland. Representative Don Bacon urged the US to recognize the moral responsibility of supporting Ukraine, pointing out that it was Russia that started the war and it was indiscriminately bombing Ukrainian cities for all this time. European leaders have also voiced strong opinions. Former European Council President and now Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk, stressed that the need for a just peace rather than a settlement that rewards aggression. Estonian lawmaker Marko Mihkelson warned that, well, at this moment could go in history as a dark day for Europe, urging leaders to act decisively to prevent a Russian victory, even a diplomatic one. Meanwhile, Ukraine remains firm in its stance. President Zelenskyy and high-ranking officials will attend the Munich Security Conference to discuss Ukraine's security priorities and prepare for further diplomatic engagement soon. Trump's Ukraine and Russia envoy Keith Kellogg is also expected to visit Ukraine shortly after this conference, indicating that these discussions will continue at the highest levels possible very, very soon. And another significant element of the ongoing negotiations is Trump's potential use of economic tools to pressure Russia. While many in Congress are questioning continued military aid to Ukraine even now, there is growing discussion about leveraging economic statecraft, including sanctions, tariffs, and export controls to force Russia's possible withdrawal. Sanctions have been long and a powerful tool in US foreign policy, and Trump has indicated a willingness to apply economic pressure. He has warned Putin that new tariffs and sanctions will be imposed if Russia fails to negotiate and end the war. However, with so many sanctions already in place, what new measures could be introduced? Let us inquire into that. Two key levers are being considered. One is stronger secondary sanctions. These would force countries to choose between doing business with the US or with sanctioned Russian entities. Similar tactics were used to pressure Iran into negotiations previously. And number two, trade restrictions on Russian energy and dual-use goods. Tightening control over goods that indirectly support Russia's war effort, including those supplied through third-party nations like China, Turkey, India, could disrupt Moscow's economic stability even more, and their economic situation is not very bright and shiny, as you could surely know. And some have suggested that easing sanctions as an incentive for Russia to negotiate, but analysts argue that this approach is unlikely to work, as Putin historically only responds to force and pressure. The key takeaway here is that economic leverage, if applied effectively, could accelerate Russia's withdrawal and end the war on terms favorable to the West and Ukraine. Once again and again, we're hearing that only force into peace will work with this kind of enemy. So where do we stand now? Russia is preparing for negotiations, but Ukraine's role in those talks remains uncertain. China is attempting to insert itself as a mediator, raising suspicions about their true intentions, and Trump's approach has sparked outrage among some US and European officials. Economic strategies are being explored as a means of pressuring Russia to end its aggression as one of the variants. These are vast and fast-moving developments with significant global consequences at this moment. After years-long stalemate and protracted war in the field, we'll continue to monitor how these diplomatic negotiations evolve and how Ukraine asserts its position, whether international support remains strong in the face of these challenges. Let us remind you that soon will be the third anniversary of the full-scale war of Russia against Ukraine. And thank you for tuning in, for supporting us in this time from my home studio too. Be sure to like, subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. It is a surprise how fast the events are unfolding at this moment. Nobody did expect that. And how could they continue at such a pace? Could they or they couldn't? As always, remember to be strong and don't let propaganda win.